The galaxy had always been a place of chaos, but it was a controlled chaos, an uneasy balance between human colonies, powerful corporations, and ancient alliances that spanned the stars. Humanity had endured, prospered even, expanding beyond the Milky Way to worlds that once only existed in myth. Yet something had changed, something insidious that no one could see. It started with whispers. A merchant ship, the Orion's Dawn, vanished without a trace, its crew and cargo gone, leaving only a faint distress signal that offered no explanation. No trace of a battle, no sign of sabotage, just silence. The Federation's investigation found nothing but empty space. Then came the news from the Outer Rim. A deep space research station had reported strange electromagnetic pulses coming from a region of the galaxy that had been thought uninhabitable for millennia. The pulses were erratic, impossible to track, but they were growing stronger, like a signal from the void calling to something or someone. In the heart of the human alliance, Captain Kale Oron, commander of the elite Vanguard unit, received orders to investigate. The Federation, calm on the outside but teetering on the edge of panic behind closed doors, was convinced these were just random events, anomalies that would fade like all others, but Kale knew better. He had spent too many years in the unforgiving depths of space to ignore the growing sense of dread that was creeping into every communication he received. Something was moving in the dark. The Vanguard ship Celestra cut through the darkness of space with precision, its sleek hull reflecting the stars as Kale stood in the command center. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Mara Valen, stood by his side, the glow of her console illuminating her determined face. "Captain," Mara began, her voice steady but tinged with an edge of concern. "The reports from the fringe systems are consistent. Something is out there. It's not just another pirate attack or a malfunction. Something's watching us." Kale nodded, his expression grim. "I know. It's too precise, too coordinated. This isn't a simple band of outlaws or a freak accident. Whatever it is, it's planned, and it's moving closer to the heart of the Federation." Mara scanned the reports again, her eyes narrowing. "It's as if they know exactly where we are, what we're doing. No one's supposed to have this kind of reach out here." "We're not the only ones with eyes in the dark," Kale muttered, tapping the edge of his command chair. His thoughts were interrupted by the sudden alarm blaring across the ship. "Captain, we're being hailed." A voice rang out from the communications console. "It's from Admiral Darius, urgent." Kale stood immediately. The Admiral was the one person he trusted, but the urgency in the summons had his pulse quickening. "Patch him through." A crackling hologram materialized in front of them. Admiral Darius's stern face appeared, his expression tight with tension. "Oron, you need to listen carefully. We've intercepted an encrypted transmission, one that we shouldn't have been able to decode. It's from inside Federation space, and it's not just a warning. It's a demand. Whoever is behind this, they know us, and they know how to strike at our core. You're dealing with something ancient, Kale." The weight of Darius's words hit Kale like a physical blow. The Admiral's usual confidence had been replaced with a palpable sense of fear. "What are we dealing with, sir?" Kale asked, his voice low. "I don't know, but I have a sinking feeling we're not facing a simple enemy. I need you to find out who, what, they are before it's too late." Before Kale could respond, the transmission ended abruptly. The silence that followed was suffocating. "Captain," Mara said quietly, her gaze scanning the empty space outside the ship. "We've been in the dark for too long. Whatever this is, it's only just begun." Kale turned, his eyes steely with resolve. "Then let's make sure it ends before it has a chance to spread." As the Celestra sped toward the unknown, the galaxy's fate seemed to hang in the balance, held by a single thread. A thread that was unraveling faster than anyone could have imagined. The Nightfall Dominion was watching, and soon the galaxy would know its name. The Celestra was now deep within uncharted space, the crew on edge as they followed the trail of anomalies. No one had expected things to escalate so quickly. As Kale stood at the helm of the ship, the distant stars twinkled innocently outside the windows, but the tension in the air was palpable. It wasn't just the strange events they were tracking. It was the creeping sense that something or someone was watching them from the depths of the black. "Captain," Lieutenant Maravallen's voice broke through the silence. "We're approaching the fringe system where the last report came from. The signals are getting stronger, but there's still no visual confirmation of any hostile presence." Kel's mind raced. The signal they'd been tracking was too deliberate to be random, too structured. Someone wanted them to find it, or perhaps to lead them into a trap. He couldn't shake the feeling that every step they took was playing into someone's hand. "Scan for any vessels or signals, even low-level transmissions," Kale ordered, his gaze fixed on the flickering console before him. "We're not picking up anything," Mara said, her fingers dancing over the control panel. "No ships, no energy signatures, not even debris from the previous fleet that disappeared. It's like the system's been scrubbed clean." Suddenly, a sharp hiss came from the communications console. The static broke, and the voice that came through was chilling, cold, detached, and somehow familiar, as if it was a voice from a forgotten nightmare. "This is the Nightfall Dominion," the voice intoned, the words echoing unnervingly across the ship's comms. "You have trespassed into our domain. Turn back, or you will be erased." The transmission cut off as abruptly as it had begun, leaving the crew frozen in stunned silence. The words hung in the air, vibrating with an unsettling power. "Nightfall Dominion," Mara whispered, her eyes wide. "We've heard rumors. They're nothing but ghost stories." "Not anymore," Kale muttered, his pulse quickening. He had suspected something dark was behind the attacks, but this was beyond anything he had prepared for. Whoever, or whatever, this Dominion was, they were more than a rogue faction. They were a force, ancient and terrifying, speaking as if they had dominion over the galaxy itself. "We need to find out where that signal came from," Kale said, his voice low and steady. "We're not leaving this system without answers." The crew scrambled to pinpoint the source of the transmission, but as they did, another shockwave passed through the ship, this time physical. The hull groaned, as if the Celestra itself was being pulled towards something immense, something unseen. "Captain," shouted Lieutenant Vallen, her hands gripping the console. "Something's pulling us in. Gravity wells are spiking." Before she could finish, the lights flickered, and a low hum filled the ship's corridors. The Celestra was being dragged, inexorably, toward the source of the signal. "All hands, brace for impact," Kale shouted, his voice commanding. "Engage emergency thrusters now." But it was too late. The ship was caught in the gravitational pull, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. The crew fought to maintain control as the ship plunged deeper into the system, toward an unseen planet that had somehow remained hidden from all scans. The planet, shrouded in darkness, emerged from the veil of space as if it had been waiting, watching. The sky above it was a swirling mass of energy, filled with storm clouds that flickered with strange blue lightning. The planet's surface was an eerie shadow, dark continents outlined by faint glimmers of unnatural light. Kel's heart pounded. This was no ordinary world. This was the Dominion's domain. "Set course for that planet," Kale ordered. "We're going in." But even as the words left his lips, Kale knew that this wasn't just a mission anymore. This was the beginning of something far larger and far more dangerous than they could ever have imagined. The Celestra was no longer simply a ship in space. It was now a vessel of destiny, one that would either destroy or be destroyed by the forces hiding in the dark. The planet loomed ahead, its dark surface now visible in every viewport of the Celestra. The storm clouds above seemed to pulse with unnatural rhythm, flashing with an eerie blue lightning that crackled ominously. The gravitational pull continued to increase, and the ship groaned under the strain. But Kale was focused, his mind sharpening. This was no random encounter, it was an invitation, a summons. The Dominion wanted them here. Engage the auxiliary thrusters, Kale ordered, gripping the arms of his command chair. We need to slow our descent before we're pulled into the atmosphere. Lieutenant Maravallen's fingers flew over the controls, but the ship's response was sluggish. The pull from the planet's gravity well was too strong. Captain, we're not going to be able to stop in time. We're on course for a landing. Looks like a flat surface ahead. The crew exchanged uneasy glances as the ship continued its descent, but Kale didn't flinch. There was no turning back now. Whatever the Dominion was, they had been lured into this confrontation by fate. The planet was a trap, but it was the only path forward. The Celestra made contact with the surface with a jarring thud, the landing gear absorbing the shock. The ship's emergency lights flickered on, casting a dim red glow throughout the interior. The hum of the engines died, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. The crew remained still for a long moment, waiting for the next move, the next strike. Kale stood, his boots thudding against the metal floor as he walked toward the exit. "Prepare for an away team," he ordered, his voice hard. "Mara, you're with me. We'll take a team of 6 to scout. Everyone else, stay alert." "Understood, Captain," Mara replied, already prepping the gear. Outside the ship, the ground was unlike anything they had ever encountered, smooth, dark, almost obsidian in texture, and devoid of the usual signs of life. No vegetation, no fauna. It was as if the planet had been carefully erased of anything that could disrupt its eerie perfection. Above them, the storm clouds swirled in unnatural formations, lightning crackling violently but never touching the ground. The atmosphere was thick, oppressive, and each breath felt heavier than the last. "Eyes open," Kale muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "This place is a trap, but we're not leaving without answers." The team of Vanguard soldiers moved quickly and efficiently, weapons drawn and scanning for any movement. Their sensors were useless. Their equipment was completely disrupted by the planet's strange energy field. They were flying blind, relying solely on instinct and experience. They advanced cautiously toward a large structure in the distance, an ancient-looking tower, its surface as black as the planet itself, standing like a monolith in the middle of an empty plain. It radiated an unnatural energy, pulsing with faint blue light from within, as if alive. The air grew colder the closer they got, the oppressive weight of the place pressing down on them. "Captain," Mara called, her voice tight with unease. "This structure, it doesn't make sense. It's too perfect. No wear, no decay. It's like it was built yesterday." Kale nodded grimly. "It wasn't built by us, and it wasn't built by anyone we know." As they approached the entrance, the door slowly creaked open on its own, revealing a dark interior bathed in that same eerie blue light. The air inside was thick, almost tangible, swirling with an unnatural chill that settled over their skin like a blanket of dread. Before they could take another step, a voice echoed from the shadows, cold and deliberate. "Welcome, Vanguard. You are not the first to come." The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once, as if it was a presence woven into the very fabric of the planet. Kale's hand went to his sidearm, but he didn't draw it, yet. "You've been expected," the voice continued, growing colder with each word. "You will serve as the first of many." A flicker of motion at the far end of the chamber caught their attention. Figures, cloaked in darkness, began to materialize, stepping into the light, revealing themselves to be soldiers like no others. Their faces were obscured by masks, but their eyes glowed with a haunting, unnatural blue. "We are the Umbrals," one of them spoke, stepping forward. "And you have entered the Nightfall Dominion's realm. You will not leave." The rest of the team tensed, weapons raised, but Kale held his hand out, stopping them. This was it, the Dominion's first direct confrontation. And Kale was prepared to learn whatever it took to stop them, even if it meant fighting in the very heart of their shadowed empire. The chamber grew colder with every word that echoed from the Umbral soldiers, their glowing blue eyes casting an eerie light across the dim interior. Kale stood at the front of his team, his gaze fixed on the figures before him. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing on his chest, but he held firm, determined not to let fear show. The leader of the Umbrals took a step forward, his movements smooth and calculated. The mask that obscured his face shimmered, as if it was more a part of him than a mere covering. A low hum filled the room, the sound almost imperceptible but unsettling, resonating deep within the bones of everyone present. "You are brave, Captain Oran," the leader said, his voice hollow, like it came from a great distance. "But your courage is meaningless here. You are not the first to challenge the Dominion, and you will not be the last. But your fate will be more immediate." Cal's grip tightened on his weapon, though he made no move to draw it. "What do you want with us?" he demanded. "What is the Nightfall Dominion? Why have you come?" The Umbral leader tilted his head slightly as if considering the question. "We are the harvesters of shadows, the ones who have existed longer than your feeble empire can comprehend. You call yourselves conquerors of the stars, but you are nothing more than children playing in a vast ancient game." Mara stepped forward beside Kale, her eyes narrowing. "You talk as if you've been here before us, but you haven't. Your time has passed. The galaxy belongs to humanity now." The leader's laugh was a cold, hollow sound, echoing off the walls. "The galaxy belongs to no one. It belongs to the void, to the eternal dark that you have only just begun to understand. You are all but fleeting, a spark in the abyss." Kale didn't flinch, but his mind raced. This was no rogue faction. These beings were something far older, something that had existed long before humanity had even dreamed of the stars. The Dominion wasn't just an empire. It was a force that lived in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. "Why show yourselves now?" Kale asked, trying to maintain control over his voice. "What do you want from humanity?" The leader of the Umbrals took another step closer, his blue eyes burning with a predatory gleam. "We have waited, watching as you expanded into the dark. You have trespassed into our domain, awakened what should have remained asleep, and now you will help us restore what was lost." "Restore?" Mara scoffed. "You speak like you're some kind of gods, but you're just another group of power-hungry conquerors." The leader's expression darkened, and in an instant, the room seemed to grow colder, the air thick with malevolent energy. "You misunderstand, Lieutenant Valen. We are not conquerors. We are the end of what you know. We do not seek to rule. It is beneath us. We seek only to return the galaxy to its rightful state, to purge the corruption of your kind." Kale's eyes hardened. "You want to destroy us." The Umbral leader didn't answer directly. Instead, his eyes flickered toward the shadows behind him. At his command, the rest of the Umbral soldiers stepped forward, their movements synchronized as if they were part of a single entity. The tension in the room thickened and Kale's team raised their weapons, but there was no immediate attack. "We do not destroy what is worthy," the leader said finally. "But you are not worthy. Not yet." With a sharp motion, he extended a hand, and the ground beneath the vanguard soldiers trembled. The walls of the chamber began to pulse with that same strange blue energy, resonating with a force that could be felt in every cell of their bodies. Suddenly, the Umbrals moved. One of them lunged at Kale, and before he could react, a blinding flash of light surged forward, enveloping him in an instant. His body froze, paralyzed by the sheer power of the blast, as if time itself had stopped. Mara shouted, but it was too late. The other soldiers quickly moved to defend, but they were outmatched. Blasts of dark energy shot from the Umbrals, knocking them off their feet one by one. The Celestra's crew was strong, but they were unprepared for the raw force the Dominion commanded. "Enough," Kale managed to say through gritted teeth, forcing his body to move despite the paralyzing grip. He knew the fight was lost, at least for now. We'll never bow to you. The leader tilted his head, as if curious about Cal's defiance. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he stepped back, signaling for the assault to stop. The soldiers ceased their attacks, and the oppressive energy in the room dissipated, leaving only an unsettling silence. "You will not escape," the leader said softly, almost pityingly. "But we will let you live for now. We have plans for you, Captain. You will understand soon enough." Cal struggled to his feet, his body aching, but his resolve remained unbroken. As the Umbrals retreated into the shadows, leaving him and his team to nurse their wounds, he knew one thing. The Dominion wasn't just a threat to humanity, it was a nightmare made real. And it was only just beginning. The chamber was still. The oppressive silence pressed against Cal's chest like a heavy weight, and for a moment, all he could hear was the ragged breathing of his crew. His muscles burned from the lingering effects of the paralyzing energy, but he forced himself to stand, pushing through the pain. Mara was already up, her face pale but determined. She moved quickly to Cal's side, her hand steady on his shoulder. "Captain," she said, voice strained, "we're alive. But they could have killed us. What the hell just happened?" Cal gritted his teeth, trying to focus. "I don't know, but they wanted us to feel their power. They wanted to send a message. They know we're a threat, and they're not taking any chances." "We can't just stand here," Mara said, her eyes flicking toward the door the Umbrals had exited through. "We need to get back to the ship, regroup, and warn the fleet. We can't take them on alone." Cal nodded slowly, but his mind raced. The power those Umbral soldiers wielded, it wasn't something they had ever encountered before. Not in the form they had seen. There was something deeper, something older, to the Dominion's strength that they hadn't revealed yet. He couldn't afford to be distracted by fear. They needed answers. They needed to know what they were up against. "We can't leave yet," Cal said firmly. "Not without understanding what we're dealing with. We don't know what they want, but if we just run now, we'll be leaving them unchecked, and that could mean the end of everything. We need to find out what their plans are." "Cal," Mara began, but she could see the determination in his eyes. She sighed, knowing he was right. They couldn't just turn tail and flee, not yet, not with the stakes so high. She grabbed a datapad from her belt and began scanning the area for any traces of information they could use. "There's a data core in this structure," she said, tapping quickly at the screen. "We might be able to access it, get some intel before they come back for us." Cal glanced around, his gaze sharp. "Do it. Fast." The team fanned out, weapons at the ready, as Mara hacked into the system. The dark energy still crackled in the air, making the tech unstable, but she was a skilled hacker. After a few moments, the wall before them shifted, revealing a hidden terminal embedded deep within the structure. A holographic display flickered to life, casting a dim light over the team. "Got it," Mara said, her voice tense. "Let's see what secrets you're hiding." As she worked, Cal's eyes never left the shadows. He could feel them, eyes watching them, unseen and unfelt. The air was thick with anticipation, as if something was about to snap. The terminal hummed, and then a series of files opened on the display. Cal leaned in, scanning the data quickly. The information was encrypted, but Mara was already working her way through the firewalls. After a tense moment, a document opened, marked with the emblem of the Nightfall Dominion. Cal's eyes narrowed as he read. "By the stars," he murmured. Mara looked over his shoulder, her eyes widening. "What is it?" "It's worse than we thought," Cal said. "The Dominion isn't just a rogue faction or a remnant empire. They've been operating in the shadows for millennia. They've been manipulating galactic events for centuries, orchestrating wars, causing disasters, even controlling the rise and fall of entire civilizations. This isn't just about conquest. This is about control over the very fabric of existence." Mara took a step back, her mind reeling from the implications. Control over existence? Yes, Kale said grimly. According to this, the Dominion has found a way to tap into something beyond normal space. A kind of energy field they call the Abyss. It's not just a weapon, it's a power source, an infinite well of energy that they've been siphoning for centuries. And now, they're preparing to unleash it in full. Mara's face went pale. Unleash it? What does that even mean? It means they plan to collapse the galaxy into itself, to erase all life and restructure it in their image. Kale's voice was low, but filled with an intensity that sent a chill down Mara's spine. They're not looking to conquer or rule, they're looking to remake everything, and we're the first obstacle in their way. That's insane, Mara breathed. How can we stop them? Kale turned to the others. We have to stop them before they finish whatever ritual they've started. We can't let them tap into the abyss any further. We're going to need more than just our guns to fight this, Mara said, eyes filled with uncertainty. This is beyond anything we've ever dealt with. We're going to fight anyway, Kale said, his voice steely with resolve. Humanity doesn't give up, not when there's a chance to win. And we're not about to start now. The air in the chamber seemed to thrum with anticipation, and for the first time since their landing, Kale felt a glimmer of hope. They didn't know how they would stop the Dominion, but they knew one thing for certain: they wouldn't back down, not while there was still breath in their lungs. The wind howled through the chamber as the hum of the structure intensified. The blue energy that radiated from the walls began to pulse with increasing frequency, as if the very heart of the planet was stirring, awakening. Kale knew time was running out. Every second they delayed brought the Dominion closer to completing whatever ritual they had started. And the more they uncovered, the clearer it became that the stakes were beyond anything they had ever imagined. We don't have much time, Mara said, breaking the silence, her eyes locked on the terminal's flickering display. This data core, it's not just information, it's a beacon. They know we found it. Cal's gaze swept over the room, instinctively scanning for any sign of movement. What does the beacon do? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Mara's fingers danced over the terminal, pulling up another set of files. It's a signal directed to their fleet. The Dominion has a fleet hiding in the far reaches of this system. They've been lying dormant, waiting for the signal to trigger the full activation of the Abyss. Once that happens, they'll have the power to consume everything. Stars, planets, everything. The galaxy will be remade or erased. Cal's fist clenched. We have to stop it before they finish the ritual. Mara nodded grimly, but her expression was filled with uncertainty. I don't know how, Kale. The Abyss, it's beyond our technology. If the Dominion is tapping into it, they could be manipulating the very laws of reality itself. We don't even know what we're up against. We're going to find out, Kale said, his voice low but determined. We'll stop them, no matter what it takes. We're humanity's last line of defense. Without waiting for another word, Kale turned and began moving toward the exit of the chamber. His crew followed close behind, weapons raised, each of them alert for any sign of the Umbral soldiers. The shadows seemed to grow deeper with every step, the air thicker and more oppressive. As they approached the large doors leading out of the chamber, the ground beneath them trembled again, more violently this time. The air itself felt charged, and the sky outside began to glow with a sickly blue light, lighting up the horizon in an unnatural manner. They had triggered something the Dominion had prepared for eons. The door ahead of them opened with a slow, echoing groan, revealing a vast, cavernous chamber beyond. The walls were lined with massive pillars, each one pulsing with that same blue energy. In the center of the room, a dark, swirling vortex hung in the air, an eerie rift, like a tear in the fabric of space itself, the Abyss. This is it, Kale murmured, his voice barely audible over the growing hum of the energy field. They've already begun the ritual. Mara's face was tight with concern. We can't just walk in there, Kale. If they're pulling that kind of power from the abyss, it could tear us apart. We have no idea what kind of defenses they have set up. We don't have a choice, Kale replied, determination hardening his tone. We're not leaving here without stopping them. If we don't, there won't be a galaxy left to defend. The team stepped cautiously into the chamber, their footsteps echoing across the vast space. The rift at the center of the room seemed to pulse with a malevolent force, its edges shimmering with a cold light that seemed to absorb the very essence of reality around it. Suddenly, the air around them began to shift. A sound, like the groan of a star being torn apart, filled the room, and from the shadows stepped the Umbral leader, flanked by a dozen of his soldiers. Their eyes glowed brighter now, burning with that same blue energy, and their presence filled the room with a palpable sense of dread. "So you've come to stop us," the leader said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "How quaint." "We're not here to talk," Kale said, his voice hard. "We're here to stop you." The Umbral leader raised a hand, and the room seemed to pulse with his will. The energy of the abyss surged, the rift widening, distorting the space around it as if reality itself was being bent and twisted. "You cannot stop what is inevitable, Captain Oran. The abyss is already ours, and once it is fully unleashed, nothing will remain of your species but dust." Kale stepped forward, his heart pounding, but his resolve unshakable. "We'll see about that." Before the Umbral leader could respond, the ground beneath them began to crack, and the blue light flared violently. The air around them grew impossibly heavy, and the gravity seemed to shift, pulling them toward the rift. The abyss was reaching out, trying to consume them, pulling them into the swirling void. "Brace!" Kale shouted, and the team moved quickly, their training kicking in as they dug their boots into the ground, trying to resist the pull. Mara's voice cracked through the chaos. "Kale, we can't fight this alone. We need to destroy the rift, or we'll all be sucked in." Kale's eyes locked onto the rift. The energy was building, accelerating. If they didn't act now, they would be too late. "I'll handle the rift," he said, turning to his team. "Mara, take the others and hold them off. We don't stop until that rift is gone." With that, Kale charged toward the center of the chamber, the rift growing larger and more unstable with each passing moment. It was now or never. Kale moved with single-minded determination, the swirling energy of the abyss pulling at his every step, threatening to devour him. The rift in the center of the chamber was like an enormous wound in the fabric of reality, its dark tendrils reaching out, warping space and time. He could feel its cold, suffocating presence trying to claw its way into his mind, but he forced himself to focus. Behind him, Mara and the others were fighting against the Umbral soldiers, their weapons firing in rapid bursts, trying to hold back the relentless tide of dark energy. He knew they were buying him time, but not much. The rift was their priority, and every second counted. The Umbral leader stood at the periphery of the chamber, his hands raised in silent command, his soldiers advancing in lockstep. Their glowing eyes locked onto the vanguard soldiers, but their attention was divided just enough for Kale to make his move. The rest of his team was spread out, using every piece of cover they could find, firing when they could, but they were trapped in a game of attrition. Kale reached the edge of the rift, the air around him thick with the power of the abyss. The gravity was pulling him closer, his body feeling as though it was being stretched thin, but he resisted the pull. He had to reach the core of the rift, where the energy was being funneled. He had to sever the connection to the Dominion's control. Mara's voice crackled through his comms. "Kale, don't be a fool. If you get too close—" "I know," Kale interrupted, his voice tight. "But this is the only way." His fingers brushed against the surface of the rift, and the moment he made contact, a jolt of power surged through him, nearly throwing him off his feet. The pain was excruciating, unlike anything he had ever experienced before. It was as though his body was being torn apart, each cell screaming in protest. But he gritted his teeth, willing himself to stay focused. The rift was feeding off the energy, but Kale realized something more. It wasn't just a conduit, it was a living thing, a parasite feeding off the life force of the galaxy. I need to destabilize it from within, Kale muttered to himself. He reached for his belt, activating the device that the Vanguard scientists had given him before they left. The only piece of technology that could disrupt the rift's core. It was a modified EMP charge, but not just any EMP. This one was designed to overload the rift's energy signature and sever the connection. The moment Kale activated the device, the rift roared to life. Dark energy crackled, lightning-like tendrils lashing out from its core, striking the walls around him. His vision blurred as the force threatened to tear him apart, but he held on. The device was pulsing in his hand, ready to be deployed. The Umbral leader saw Cal's movements and stepped forward, raising his hand. With a sudden motion, the leader unleashed a wave of raw power that shot toward Kale like a spear of darkness. The energy collided with Kale's body, sending him sprawling to the floor. The EMP device slipped from his grip, skidding away toward the rift. Mora's voice came through again, panicked. "Kale, get up now." Cal's vision swam as he fought to regain his senses, his body aching from the impact. He could feel the rift's pull growing stronger, the fabric of space itself warping around him. The Umbral leader had moved too quickly, and the EMP had been disrupted, but it wasn't too late. He could still reach it. With a grunt, Kale pushed himself to his feet, his legs unsteady, and lunged toward the device. The ground beneath him trembled, as though the very planet itself was reacting to the rift's expansion. He reached the EMP, his fingers trembling as he grabbed it, but before he could activate it, the Umbral leader's voice rang out, filled with cold malice. "Foolish human, you think you can stop what's already begun." Kale didn't respond. His only focus was the EMP. His hand shook as he slammed it into the core of the rift, pressing the activation button with all the force he could muster. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a violent pulse of energy shot through the chamber, the rift shrieking as if in pain. The walls cracked, and the very air seemed to ripple. A blinding light erupted from the rift, blinding Kale and pushing him to the ground. His breath was stolen by the force of the explosion, his mind reeling from the overwhelming surge of power. Through the haze, he could hear the Umbral leader's voice, quieter now, tinged with disbelief. "No, this cannot be." The rift began to shrink, its edges unraveling like the threads of a frayed tapestry. The air seemed to rush back into the chamber, and the gravity slowly returned to normal. The oppressive weight that had held them all in place began to dissipate. The power of the abyss was receding. But Kale knew they had not won yet. The Dominion had countless other weapons, other means of control. This battle was far from over. The rift was just the first step. He rose shakily to his feet, vision clearing. "Mara." "We're still standing, Kale." Mara's voice came through, full of relief. "But we need to get out of here. Now." Kale looked toward the rift one last time as it collapsed in on itself, the power draining away into the void. The battle was over for now, but he knew that the Nightfall Dominion would return, and next time they wouldn't be so easily stopped. "Let's move," Kale said, voice filled with resolve. "We've got work to do." The ground beneath their feet still trembled as the final remnants of the rift vanished, the air clearing of its oppressive weight. The chamber was eerily silent, save for the distant echoes of the battle still raging outside. But even as the light from the abyss faded, Kale knew their work wasn't done. The rift might have closed, but the Nightfall Dominion's reach was far too vast to be stopped by a single skirmish. "Kale," Mara called out, her voice shaking as she caught up with him. "What now? We've cut off their power source, but they won't let us leave without making sure we're dead." Kale's eyes were sharp as he surveyed the remains of the chamber. The Dominion had been unrelenting, but they were still vulnerable. He could feel the weight of their victory and the enormity of the task that lay ahead. We keep moving, he said, his tone grim but resolute. This fight isn't over. We've seen what they're capable of, and we have to take the fight to them. Mara nodded, but her expression was filled with doubt. You're right, Kale, but we've already lost so much. We've seen what's at stake. How are we supposed to stop them when they can tap into powers beyond our understanding? We don't stop, Kale said firmly. Humanity doesn't give up. Ever. We fight until the end. His words were echoed by the rest of the crew, their faces set with grim determination. Even if the odds were against them, even if they stood alone against an empire capable of destroying entire galaxies, they would keep fighting. It was what they had always done. It was what they would always do. The doors to the chamber opened with a heavy groan, and the team moved cautiously out into the dimly lit corridors. The Umbral soldiers had retreated for now, but Kale knew that they would be back, stronger and more determined than ever. The Dominion would not let them escape this easily. We need to get to the ship, Kale said, his voice steady but urgent. Once we're in the air, we can regroup and plan our next move. We can't waste any time. Mara turned to Kale, her eyes narrowing. What's the plan after that? We don't even know where the Dominion's fleet is. We don't have enough firepower to take them on. We don't need firepower, Kale replied, his mind racing as he thought through their options. We need intelligence. We need to understand how the Dominion operates, where they're getting their power, and how we can take them down from the inside. We could sabotage their supply chains, Mara suggested, her eyes gleaming with the same resolve that Kale had seen in her before. Strike at their weakest points and hit them where it hurts. Kale nodded, the plan taking shape in his mind. Exactly. We hit their infrastructure, take down their key leaders, and disrupt their communication channels. If we can do that, we'll start to break them from the inside. But they won't make it easy, Mara warned. The Dominion doesn't operate like anything we faced before. They have the Abyss, and that's not something we can just dismantle with a few well-placed bombs. We'll find a way, Kale said, his voice unshaken. We don't need to fight their power head-on. We need to outsmart them. They've underestimated us before, and they will again. We have the one thing they can't control, our will to survive. The crew moved quickly through the corridors, their footsteps echoing in the silence. There were no more words, just the understanding that they were moving forward, one step at a time, into the unknown. Outside, the stars shimmered in the sky, distant and cold. But in Kale's heart, there was a fire burning. The Dominion may have had the power of the Abyss on their side, but they hadn't counted on humanity's resolve. They hadn't counted on the strength that came from fighting for something greater than survival. As they reached the hangar bay and made their way toward the ship, Cal's thoughts lingered on what lay ahead. The battle was far from over, but with every passing moment, he knew they were one step closer to ending the Dominion's reign of shadows. The universe had a choice now, whether to remain under the dark hand of the Nightfall Dominion or to rise up and reclaim the stars. Humanity would lead the charge, no matter the cost. As Kale boarded the ship, he glanced back one last time at the world they had just left behind. The ruins of the rift were gone, but the fight for the galaxy's future was just beginning. All systems online, Mara's voice came through the comms. We're ready to go. Kale nodded. Then let's make sure they remember us. With a final glance at the dying planet, he gave the order, and the ship ascended into the stars, leaving behind a shattered world, but carrying with it the last hope of a galaxy on the brink of destruction. The Dominion's night had come, but the dawn of humanity's vengeance was just beginning.